Am I the jerk? A tale of betrayal, forgiveness, and the shadows in between. The night air was thick with the scent of rain, though the storm had long passed. I sat at my usual spot in O'Malley's Tavern, nursing a whiskey I barely tasted, staring at the condensation dripping down the glass like the days slipping through my fingers. Still thinking about it, eh? Detective Harrison slid onto the stool beside me. He was an old friend, or at least he used to be, before my life turned into something resembling a late-night noir film. Hard not to, I muttered, swirling the amber liquid. It's not. Every day you find out the woman you swore your life to has been... I stopped. I'd said it too many times already. Yeah, Harrison sighed. And yet, you forgave her. That was the part that made people tilt their heads like confused dogs. It wasn't just once. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was multiple times. And each time, she had sworn to me, eyes glistening with tears, hands trembling on my face, that it was over. That I was all she wanted. That she was broken, and I was the only one who could put her back together, and like a fool, I had believed her. Look, man, Harrison said, lighting a cigarette despite the bar's no-smoking rule. No one dared stop him. I get it. Love makes people do crazy things, but at some point you gotta ask yourself, are you the hero in this story, or just the sucker? I chuckled dryly. There's a fine line, huh? Harrison exhaled a slow cloud of smoke. Oh, there's a line. Question is, how far past it are you willing to go? I didn't answer, because in truth I had already gone further than anyone realized. The first time she cheated, it was with a coworker. A charming, smooth-talking executive with the kind of money that made our modest life seem dull in comparison. I confronted her. She cried. She promised it meant nothing. I forgave her. The second time, it was an old boyfriend. A man who had always been just a friend. I found out through a text I wasn't supposed to see, again, the tears, the promises, the desperate whispers of, I can't lose you, please. And again, I forgave her. The third time, I didn't find out by accident. I followed her, and that's when I realized something. This wasn't weakness. It wasn't addiction. It wasn't something she couldn't control. She enjoyed it. The secrecy, the deception, the power of knowing she could have me and them. That no matter how many times she shattered me, I would be there, picking up the pieces, waiting for her to tell me it was okay to move forward. I was not a man in love. I was a game piece. Harrison tapped the bar counter, breaking my thoughts. So, what's the plan? I took a slow sip of my whiskey. She wants to go on a trip, I said. A weekend away, just the two of us, to rekindle things. Harrison raised an eyebrow. And you're going? Oh, absolutely. He studied me for a long moment, then let out a low chuckle. You're up to something. I set my glass down and met his gaze. She's made her moves, I said. Now it's my turn. Harrison gave a slow nod. And then, for the first time in a long time, I smiled. The game was finally over. The weekend trip was her idea. Just us, she had said, her fingers ghosting over mine as we sat on our worn-out couch, the same couch where we had once curled up and whispered secrets, before I knew that hers ran deeper than mine ever could. No. Phones. No distractions. Let's fix us. Fix us. The words echoed in my head as I drove through the winding forest roads, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. She sat beside me, humming softly, gazing out at the trees like she hadn't spent the last few years turning my heart into a wasteland. I played along, smiling at her when she caught my eye, letting my fingers brush over hers. A part of me wanted to believe she meant it. That this time, she was ready to be the woman I had fought so hard to keep. But I had stopped believing in fairy tales. The cabin was isolated, perched on the edge of a lake so still it looked like glass. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, the sky bruised with the colors of an approaching storm. I unloaded the bags while she walked inside, stretching her arms, twirling like a dancer. God, this is perfect, she sighed. I set the bags down and watched her. She doesn't know yet. Dinner was warm, candlelit. Wine flowed freely, her laughter tinkling like wind chimes. She was putting on a show, trying to remind me of the woman I had once fallen in love with, and for a moment, it almost worked. Then her phone buzzed. A single vibration, a notification she had forgotten to silence. She froze. Just for a second. Just long enough, my gaze flicked to the screen before she could snatch it away. See you Monday. Can't stop thinking about last time. Silence stretched between us, her lips parted, scrambling for an excuse. I exhaled slowly and smiled. It's okay. Confusion flickered across her face. You're not mad? I shook my head, standing up. No, not at all. And then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Her face drained of color as I slid it across the table. The screen was already open. A recording of her, of him, of everything, every whispered lie, every stolen touch, every betrayal, all captured, neatly packaged, sent to a lawyer, to her family. To her friends, I had spent years being the fool. Now she was the one playing catch-up. She shot up from her chair, knocking over her wine glass. You! I did what I should have done a long time ago. She stared at me, chest heaving. You're a monster. I tilted my head. And what does that make you? For once, she had no words. I grabbed my keys, stepping toward the door. Enjoy the cabin, I said. I already booked your flight home. And then I walked out, leaving her, alone with nothing but the weight of her own reflection. Am I the jerk? Maybe. But for the first time in years, I felt free. Am I the jerk? Part 3. The Aftermath. The rain had started falling by the time I reached the main road, the sound of it drumming against the car roof like impatient fingers. My hands were steady on the wheel, my heartbeat slow. For the first time in years, I felt no anger, no bitterness, no sickening hope, just clarity. I wasn't driving home to her. I wasn't waiting for another apology. I wasn't bracing myself for the next inevitable lie. It was over. She was over. And yet... My phone vibrated on the passenger seat. I glanced at it, a name I didn't expect. Detective Harrison. I sighed and answered. If you're calling to lecture me, I don't need it. I don't think you realize what you just did, Harrison said, his voice tight. Something in his tone made the hairs on my neck rise. What do you mean? A pause. A sound in the background. Papers shuffling, a chair creaking. You should get somewhere public. Now. I frowned. What the hell are you talking about? Another pause. Then, you think you're the first man she's done this to? I pulled into a 24-hour diner, my fingers drumming against the table as I waited for Harrison. The waitress poured my coffee without asking, sensing I wasn't in the mood for conversation. I stared out the rain-streaked window, my mind circling. His words. You think you're the first man she's done this to? I thought I knew everything. Every betrayal, every manipulation, every twisted little game. I had been wrong. Harrison slid into the booth, his coat dripping with rain. His face was tight, eyes scanning the diner like we were being watched. Start talking, I said. He dropped a file onto the table, a thick one, worn edges, pages filled with names, dates, police reports. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a man's face. Dark eyes, strong jaw, a name I didn't recognize. He was you before you, Harrison said, and there were others before him. I flipped through the pages. Different men, different cities, all with the same connection. Her. My stomach turned. What happened to them? Harrison's jaw tensed. The lucky ones? He exhaled. They lost everything. She bled them dry, emotionally, financially, legally, made sure they looked crazy, unstable. Some ended up in jail, others in psychiatric hospitals. I swallowed hard. And the unlucky ones? Harrison didn't answer. He didn't have to. A slow chill crawled up my spine. She hadn't just been playing me, she had been hunting me, carefully, methodically, and I had just made myself her biggest enemy. I had ruined her life, exposed her, cut her off from everything she controlled, and now she had nothing to lose. "Come with me," Harrison said. "We'll keep you somewhere safe until we figure this out." I smirked, but there was no humor in it. "You think she's dangerous?" Harrison leaned in, voice low. "I think she's more dangerous than you ever imagined," I exhaled. Rubbed my jaw. Then, without a word, I closed the file. "I'm not running," Harrison cursed under his breath. "Damn it, man. I spent years letting her dictate the rules," I said. "Not anymore." My eyes met his. She played her game. I pushed the file back toward him. "Now we play mine." Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in the darkness, she was waiting. But this time, so was I. Am I the jerk? Part 4. The hunt begins. The air outside was sharp with the smell of rain and asphalt. I stood under the flickering neon sign of the diner, hands deep in my pockets, letting the cold settle into my bones. Harrison was right. I should have been running. But I wasn't the same man who had sat across from her, swallowing lies like they were medicine. I wasn't running. I was hunting. Harrison's car idled beside me. He rolled down the window, his jaw tight. "Look, man, you think you're in control, but she's always 3 steps ahead. You can't just outmaneuver her like some cheap thriller." I smiled, slow and sharp. "Who said I was going to outmaneuver her?" Harrison narrowed his eyes. "What are you planning?" I didn't answer, because the truth was, I wasn't sure yet. But I knew one thing. If she wanted to play dirty, I could too. I checked into a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, the kind where the walls were thin and the reception clerk didn't ask questions. I pulled the curtains shut, set my phone on the nightstand, and opened my laptop. Time to start digging. If she had done this before, there had to be a pattern. The names Harrison had shown me, they weren't just random men she had used and discarded. They were carefully chosen, smart, stable, successful, and every single one of them had something to lose. That's when it hit me. She never left them. She made them disappear, not physically, but legally, socially. By the time she was done, they weren't men anymore. They were whispers, cautionary tales, and I had just put myself at the top of her list. The motel room was silent except for the soft hum of my laptop. I sifted through old reports, social media accounts, anything that tied her to her past victims. Then, I found it. A name. One that wasn't in Harrison's file. A man who had vanished 5 years ago. No body. No trace. Just gone. And the last person he had been seen with? My wife. My breath came slow and steady. She thought she had erased him, but ghosts have a funny way of coming back. It was nearly 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed, a blocked number. I stared at it. Let it ring twice. 3 times. Then I answered. Silence. Then, a soft breath, and a voice I knew far too well. "You should have just let it go." I smiled. Funny. I was about to tell you the same thing. A pause. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down, my pulse calm. She had made her move. Now it was my turn. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. By sunrise, I had an address, a storage unit registered under a fake name she had used before. If she had buried secrets, that's where I'd find them. I grabbed my keys, slipped a knife into my boot, and headed out. Because the truth wasn't just going to reveal itself, I had to dig it up, and I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty. Am I the jerk? Part 5. Buried Truths. The storage facility was tucked in the farthest corner of an industrial park, the kind of place where secrets gathered dust. Rust clung to the chain-link fence, and a single flickering streetlight bathed the rows of units in a dull yellow haze. I pulled into the lot, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, scanning the perimeter. No cameras, no security guards, just a keypad at the entrance. Good. I stepped out of the car, pulling my hood up against the drizzle. In my pocket, my fingers brushed against the small slip of paper I had scribbled the access code on, one of the many things I had dug up on her in the past few hours. She had been careful, but not careful enough. Unit 317. A dull red door. Heavy. Lock. I punched in the code. The light blinked green. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. I hesitated only for a moment before pulling the door open. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not death. Something older, stale, like forgotten memories. I flicked. On my flashlight, rows of boxes, labeled, stacked with surgical precision, and a single metal filing cabinet against the back wall. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just storage. This was a vault, a collection, a graveyard of past lives. I moved quickly, pulling open the nearest box. Documents, letters, printed emails, photos, all of them tied to men. Her men. Every one of them had been drawn into her web, and every one of them had been destroyed. There were restraining orders, ones she had filed against them, text messages carefully edited to make her look like a victim, bank records showing accounts mysteriously drained before sudden breakups. And the worst part? It had worked. She hadn't just manipulated them. She had erased them. And now it was my turn. A sound outside. Soft footsteps. I killed the flashlight and pressed my back against the shelves, heart pounding. She was here. I heard the metallic click of a gun being cocked. Then, her voice. Calm. Sharp. You never knew when to stop, did you? I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening around the knife in my boot. Then, I stepped out of the shadows and smiled. Neither did you. The game had reached its final move, and I wasn't playing defense anymore. Am I the jerk? Part 6. Checkmate. For a long moment, neither of us moved. She stood in the doorway, the dim glow of the street light casting sharp shadows across her face. The gun in her hand was steady, the barrel aimed directly at my chest. You were supposed to let this go, she said, her voice quiet, almost disappointed. I smiled. So were all the others, right? A flicker in her eyes, just for a second. But I saw it. I had spent years studying her. I knew when she was lying. I knew when she was in control. And I knew when she was afraid. You don't have to do this, I said, stepping forward. She didn't flinch. You think you're special? That you're different? She exhaled sharply. You're just another arrogant bastard who thought he could control me. I laughed. A low, dry sound. Control you? I gestured to the boxes around us. I think we both know who's been pulling the strings. Her grip tightened on the gun. You don't get it, do you? No one will believe you. No one ever does. I'm the victim. You're the abuser. The obsessive, paranoid husband who couldn't handle losing. She was right. If I had gone to the police with just suspicions, they would have looked at me like the problem. But I wasn't here to beg for help. I was here to win. I reached into my pocket slowly. Her finger twitched on the trigger. Don't. I ignored her. Pulled out my phone. Turned the screen toward her. Her expression didn't change at first. Then, She saw it, the live stream. Thousands of people watching, listening, every word she had. Just spoken, broadcasted. Her face was out there now, the storage unit, the boxes, the names of all the men she had ruined. The world was watching, and for the first time in her life, she had lost control. She moved fast, faster than I expected. The gun shifted, but I was already lunging. A crack, a flash of fire from the muzzle, a searing pain ripped across my arm, but I didn't stop. I slammed into her, the gun clattering to the ground as we crashed into the shelves. Boxes tumbled down. Papers scattered. She clawed at me, twisting, fighting, but she wasn't used to losing. I pinned her wrist, forcing her down, breathing hard. She looked up at me, and for the first time, she wasn't the predator, she was the prey. Her lips parted, maybe to beg, maybe to lie one last time. But I leaned down, my voice low, steady. Game over. And then, the flashing red and blue lights filled the night. The aftermath. The police swarmed the unit. Harrison was the first through the door, gun raised. But I was already standing, hands up, bleeding, but alive. She was on the ground, stunned, defeated, and the moment the officers saw what was in the boxes, they knew her perfect world shattered, her carefully woven lies unraveled. For the first time, the truth wasn't something she could manipulate. It was evidence, and no amount of crocodile tears could save her. Am I the jerk? That's what I asked myself once, for forgiving her, for staying, for believing in something that was never real. But now I don't wonder anymore because I'm free, and she's just another cautionary tale. Am I the jerk? Part 7, The Final Truth. The courtroom smelled like polished wood and cheap cologne. I sat in the front row, my arms still stiff from where the bullet had grazed me. The bandage peeked out from under my shirt, a small reminder of just how close she had come to making me her next ghost. She was led inside, wrists shackled, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of the designer clothes she had once used as armor. Her face was blank, but I saw it. The slight twitch in her jaw, the tension in her shoulders. For the first time, she was the one who didn't know what came next, and I was the one holding the cards. The trial was a spectacle. Every past victim she had buried, financially, legally, socially, came back to haunt her. The evidence from the storage unit was damning. Forgery, identity fraud, extortion, false police reports, and worse. One of the men, the one who had vanished, was never found. But his bank accounts had been drained before he disappeared. His last known location? A cabin. The same one she had taken me to. The same one where I had almost been next. Her lawyers tried to spin the narrative. She was the victim. I was the monster. But the world had seen the truth live, and no one was buying the act anymore. The judge's voice rang out, steady and cold. Guilty on all charges. My fingers curled into my palms. I let out a slow breath. It was over. She turned to look at me then, her eyes searching mine, as if she could still find a way to crawl back inside my head. I held her gaze. Then, I smiled. Not out of victory, not out of spite, but because I was free. And she knew it. Am I the jerk? That question used to haunt me. But now, as I stepped out of the courthouse feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, I had my answer. No, I was just the man who survived. And she? She was finally forgotten. Am I the jerk? Epilogue. The last move. Months passed, seasons changed, but some scars run deeper than time. Even with her locked away, I never stopped looking over my shoulder, because people like her, they don't just disappear. They adapt. Wait, and then they find a way back into your life. It started with a letter. No return address. Just my name, written in the same elegant handwriting I had once traced with my fingers. I almost didn't open it. Almost. Inside, a single line. You think this is over? You never understood the game at all. My stomach turned cold. I stared at the words, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not anger, but certainty. Because she was right. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. I burned the letter. Then I picked up my phone, dialed a number I never thought I'd use again. Harrison answered on the first ring. She sent you something, didn't she? I exhaled. Yeah, a pause. Then his voice came through low and grim. She's not done with you. I nodded, staring at the flames devouring the paper. That's fine, I said, because I'm not done with her either. The end. Am I the jerk? Part 8. The Shadow Game. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what was coming. She wasn't the type to accept defeat. Prison was just a temporary inconvenience, a new board, a new set of rules. And now that she had lost the game on my terms, she was going to make sure the next one was on hers. Harrison met me the next morning at a diner. The same one where he had first warned me. He tossed a folder onto the table. You're not gonna like this. I opened it. Inside were documents, bank statements, official records, legal motions. She had already started rebuilding. Impossible, I muttered. She's got people on the outside, Harrison said, and money stashed away that we couldn't find. She's been moving pieces while she's inside. And now, he tapped one of the papers. She's trying to get out. My jaw tightened. Early parole, a plea deal in the works. She wasn't just coming back. She was erasing everything. Harrison exhaled. You want to know the worst part? I looked at him. She's painting herself as the victim again, he said. Claims you set her up. That the live stream was manipulated. That you're the dangerous one. I let out a slow breath. She's flipping the script. She always does. The weight of it pressed down on me. She had spent years perfecting the art of rewriting history, and this time, she was turning me into the villain. The news broke 2 weeks later. Falsely accused woman fights for her freedom. New evidence emerges that could overturn high-profile conviction. Victim or master manipulator, the internet is divided. And just like that, she was winning again. The court of public opinion had always been her battlefield, and I was about to become her next target. But if she thought I was just going to sit back and let it happen, she had no idea who she was dealing with. Checkmate? No, this is just the next round. Am I the jerk? Part 9, The Queen's Gambit. I watched it all unfold like a slow-motion car crash. The news anchors debated her case on prime-time television. Comment sections were flooded with conspiracy theories. People who had never met her, never suffered under her, rushed to defend her. She was framed. The husband was controlling. He set her up because she wanted to leave him. The world was turning upside down, and I knew exactly who was pulling the strings. She wasn't just getting out. She was winning the war before she even left the cell. And if I didn't move fast, I was going to be her next disappearing act. Harrison called. Got bad news, he said. Of course he did. I rubbed my temple. Let me guess. The parole hearing got pushed up? Silence. Then, she's walking in 3 days. I sat up so fast my chair nearly tipped over. 3 days? They're saying new evidence proves she was manipulated into everything. That the men she set up were actually controlling her. His voice was tight with anger. Your name's all over those reports, man. You're the villain now. I squeezed my eyes shut. Of course. Of course she had managed this. She didn't need proof. She just needed doubt, and once that seed was planted, it grew like a virus. 3 days. I had 3 days to stop her. But I wasn't going to win this in a courtroom. Not against her. No, this had to end on my terms, and I knew exactly where to start. Grabbed my keys, slipped my knife into my boot, and left. It was time to visit an old friend, because if I was going to beat her at her own game, I needed to find the one person she never wanted me to meet. The man who vanished. Am I the jerk? Part 10. The Ghost in the Machine. The drive was long, the air outside thick with an impending storm, but it felt like the calm before the chaos. I wasn't heading to a familiar place, but I knew exactly where to go. An abandoned farmhouse at the edge of town. It had been years since anyone had even thought about it, let alone visited. But I had heard the whispers, the rumors. The town was full of secrets, and the place where she had erased a man's very existence was one of them. I had to know what had really happened to him. The man who had vanished. The house looked as though time had forgotten it. Weathered wood, cracked windows, an overgrown yard. No one had bothered with it for years, and that's exactly why it was perfect. I parked my car at the far end of the driveway, cutting the engine, and stepped out into the damp, heavy air. The scent of earth, decay, and something older filled my lungs. I didn't hesitate. I made my way to the back, toward the rusted shed where I knew I'd find what I needed. Inside, it was colder than I expected. The walls were lined with dusty crates and old furniture, the remnants of a life left behind. But it wasn't the objects that caught my attention. It was the smell. A faint scent, like cheap perfume mixed with the remnants of ink. An old, familiar scent I hadn't realized I was still tracking. There, a locked drawer beneath a stack of dusty papers. I pried it open, my heart racing. Inside were notebooks, files, and photographs. As I flicked through the first few pages, I realized they were hers, her handwriting, her notes. But it wasn't just about the men she had manipulated. There were details about him, the man who had vanished. His name was Daniel. He hadn't disappeared voluntarily, not like I had been led to believe. She hadn't just broken him, she had used him. I felt the pieces clicking into place one by one. Daniel wasn't the first victim, but he was the one who had come closest to truly seeing her for what she was. And that was what had ultimately led to his disappearance. She had done something to him that she hadn't done to anyone else. She had made him disappear completely. But how? I kept reading. The last pages of the notebook were chilling. Details about a cabin in the woods, a set of keys, a locked room. She had kept him there, trapped, hidden. It was all there, in ink, in her words. She had made sure no one knew about Daniel. Not his family, not the authorities, not even the men who would have cared to investigate. She erased his existence the same way she erased everything else, by making them doubt themselves, making them think they were the problem. But the key was in my hands now. The cabin, the room, the truth she had never been able to completely bury. My fingers shook as I grabbed the set of keys, the worn metal heavy in my palm. This was it. This was the proof I had been looking for, the one thing that would finally end her reign of manipulation and lies. I pocketed the keys, grabbed the remaining files, and slammed the drawer shut. Then I turned toward the door. It was time to finish this. The cabin. The rain had picked up by the time I reached the cabin. It was hidden deep in the woods, isolated. Exactly the kind of place someone like her would choose to hide a secret. I parked the car a little ways away, leaving it behind as I trudged through the mud. The trees were so dense I could barely see the cabin through the mist. Every step was harder than the last, the weight of what I was carrying pushing down on my chest. But I couldn't stop now. Not after everything. The cabin was small, run down, but strangely unscathed by time. The door was locked. Of course it was. But I already had the keys. I slid one into the rusted lock, turning it slowly, and the door creaked open with a groan. Inside. It was dark and musty. The air smelled of damp wood and old memories. But what really caught my attention were the photos, tacked to the walls, photos of her, photos of the men she had used, Photos of Daniel, the man who had vanished, who was supposed to be gone forever. There he was, in the middle of a group photo, smiling like he had never even known the monster he was living with. But he had figured it out. He had finally figured it out, and that's why she had to silence him. The final room in the cabin was locked, just like the notebook had said. I slid the key into the lock, heart pounding in my ears as the door creaked open. Inside was a bed, a desk, and a wall covered in documents, pictures, and a strange set of coordinates that led here. It was all connected. She hadn't just erased his life. She had created an entire new identity, a false reality. She had done it so well, even I hadn't suspected it. She had tried to make it look like Daniel was just a man who walked away, that he'd left his life behind. But the truth was in this room, all around me. The truth I had been blind to until now. Daniel was alive, and he had been trying to get out all along. Am I the jerk? Part 11. The Return of the Ghost. The discovery in the cabin was a weight that settled deep in my bones, as heavy and suffocating as the air itself. The walls, covered in photographs and documents, were a tangled web of lies and half-truths. I stood frozen, staring at the coordinates she had meticulously marked. There were no doubts now. Daniel wasn't just a casualty. He was a ghost, an asset in her twisted game, kept hidden because he had seen through her. And just like all her other victims, she had tried to erase him from existence. But this wall, these documents, everything in this room, this was his story. I rifled through the papers, my heart racing. Some were old letters, others were logs, entries, from Daniel himself. They chronicled his life after he had been locked away in this cabin, after he had realized the truth about her. He had tried to escape, but failed. Because she had done what she always did. She manipulated and controlled every aspect of his reality. He had begged for help. He had written letters, coded messages hidden within artifacts she never thought would be looked at again. Messages that she never believed would be discovered. And here I was. Discovering them, I found the last letter buried beneath a stack of papers. It was dated 2 months before he had vanished completely. Daniel had written it, and I could almost hear his voice. In my mind as I read, if you're reading this, then she has failed again. Or perhaps she has already taken me. I can't tell anymore, but what I know for sure is that she will never stop. Not until she controls everything. Not until she has everyone under her thumb. I'm not asking for help. I'm asking for someone to know the truth. She is a monster, but she will never be seen as one. She will use you, twist you, until you think you're the one in the wrong. If I'm gone, don't look for me. She will lead you on a wild goose chase. But if you find this letter, if you find this place, then you know what to do. Keep her secrets safe. I trust you. The letter was signed simply, Daniel. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, absorbing everything that was laid out before me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about her and me playing a twisted game. This was about a truth that needed to be exposed. The turning point, it was clear now. She hadn't just broken Daniel. She had shattered him in ways no one could imagine, only to disappear him so completely that his existence would be nothing more than a myth. A story whispered about in the shadows. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. I grabbed the remaining photos from the wall, the ones that showed Daniel's face, and stuffed them into my jacket. The storm was growing worse, but I knew what I had to do. I didn't need to find Daniel anymore. I didn't need to bring him back. I needed to expose her, and I needed to make the world believe in her lie. The game is not over. I returned to the city the next day. The storm raged on as I sat in the back of a dimly lit bar, tapping my fingers nervously on the table. The man across from me, an old investigator who owed me a favor, scanned through the documents I had, handed him. His eyes narrowed as he flipped through the stack, stopping at one of the photographs. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't hesitate. "It's the key. She's been hiding her past. She's erased everyone, and now it's time to make sure people know the truth." The investigator took a slow breath, folding the picture in half. "This is a bombshell, you know. If we go public with this, she won't just lose her parole. She'll lose everything, her freedom, her reputation." "I'm not doing this for justice," I said, voice steady. "I'm doing it so the world knows who she truly is. So no one else ends up as collateral damage in her game." He nodded, his face grim. "You realize, though, she won't let this slide. She'll come after you again. This time, it won't be for a prison sentence. She'll do whatever it takes to keep her secrets buried." I didn't flinch. Let her come. The exposure a week later, the first article hit the news. The headline read, "The Woman Who Erased Her Past, the Dark Truth Behind the Disappearance of Daniel Price." It was a bombshell. The photos, the documents, and, most damning of all, the interviews with people who had worked with her before she became a so-called victim, all pointed to one conclusion. She had manipulated every aspect of her life, controlled the narrative, and buried the truth in layers of lies. She had destroyed Daniel's life, and when he fought back, she made him disappear. The world exploded. The public outcry was massive. Social media was flooded with questions and accusations. The once innocent woman everyone thought was a victim was now seen for what she really was. A monster. The final move, but it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. I knew she would come after me. She would try to silence me, the way she had silenced Daniel. Am I the jerk? Part 12, the final reveal. The dust had settled, or at least I thought it had. In the days that followed, the story of her manipulation spread like wildfire. News outlets, social media, blogs, everyone had something to say about her fall from grace. But even with her reputation in tatters, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for her moment to strike. The truth had been exposed, but she had never been the type to admit defeat. And I knew she would make one final play to regain control. But this time, it wouldn't be her words that had power. It would be mine. The first sign that something wasn't over came in the form of an anonymous message. I found it in my inbox, untraceable, with no name or number attached. But the words were clear. "You think the game is won, don't you? You think you've won, but I've only just begun. This isn't the end. This is your mistake." I stared at the words for a long time, the message sitting there like a cold, malicious specter. I had exposed her. I had destroyed her carefully constructed web of lies. So why did it feel like I was still being played? That's when it hit me. It wasn't the world she had to control anymore. It was me. I reached out to Harrison, knowing he would have the resources I needed. He didn't even need to ask why. The urgency was in my voice. "We need to act fast. She's planning something big." "I've been tracking her movements," Harrison replied. "She's been trying to reach out to some old associates. They've been laying low for years, but now they're starting to stir. Looks like she's building an army of sorts." I clenched my fist. "She's not just coming after me. She's going after everyone who knows the truth." Harrison's voice was grim. "Exactly. If we don't stop her now, she'll have the resources to turn this whole thing around, to make it look like she was the one wronged. The last game, it wasn't long before we found her. She was holed up in a warehouse just outside the city, surrounded by a handful of familiar faces from her past, people who had been her allies and enforcers. They were all in. She was rebuilding her empire." I walked into that warehouse. prepared for anything. My heart was a drumbeat in my chest, but I wasn't scared. I had nothing left to lose. I had already taken everything she had thrown at me, and now she was facing me one last time. The sound of her laugh echoed through the warehouse when I stepped in, almost like she had been expecting me. "Did you really think I'd let it end like this?" she said, her voice laced with venom. Her eyes, those eyes I once loved, held a fire I had never seen before. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was coming at me full force, ready to destroy everything in her path once more, but this time she didn't know that I was prepared. The final confrontation. She walked toward me, her movement smooth, calculated. "You think you've beaten me? That you've somehow outsmarted me? Don't be naive." I kept my voice steady, but every word felt like it carried the weight of years of pain, betrayal, and anger. "I didn't beat you. I just showed the world what you really are." She smiled, almost pitying me. "You think they'll believe you forever? Everyone forgets. They always forget. In time, the truth will be buried under new headlines, new stories." "And what about you?" I challenged, stepping closer. "What happens when you can't manipulate the facts anymore? What happens when the world sees you for the monster you are?" Her eyes flashed. "You think you can expose me again? Do you think your little discovery changes anything? You don't get it, do you? You're still playing my game." I could feel it, the shift in the air. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final move to be made. But this time she was wrong. It wasn't her game anymore. It had never been her game. I reached into my jacket, pulling out the photos, the ones that had once been hidden in the cabin. The photos of her, the ones from the very beginning, the ones that could destroy the final illusion she had created. Her face fell as she recognized them. "You still have those?" she whispered, her voice faltering. I didn't respond. I simply dropped the photos onto the cold concrete floor between us. One by one, the truth spilled out before her, as undeniable as the air we breathed. The web she had spun, her lies, her manipulations, her erasure of so many lives, was laid bare for everyone to see. She staggered back, but it was too late. The photos had already made their way online. News outlets were already calling it the biggest scandal in years. She had been exposed again. The last move, for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't thought possible. Peace. She was finished, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of the world. The game was over. And, for the first time, she would never get to rewrite the narrative. Am I the jerk? Part 13. The Final Shadow. It should have been over. The world had seen the truth. She was finished. Her empire of lies reduced to rubble. The headlines had shifted, and her carefully crafted world of manipulation had crumbled beneath the weight of reality. People had finally started to ask the hard questions about her, about the things she had done, about the lives she had destroyed. But there was a part of me that knew, deep down, that this wasn't truly the end. The woman I had once known, the woman I thought I loved, was never going to just fade into obscurity. The truth was powerful, but her desperation had always been more dangerous. And I had learned over the years that desperation is a force that doesn't die quietly. It lingers. Days passed. The news cycle moved on, as it always does. Other stories took the spotlight. The scandal surrounding her began to dissipate, replaced by the latest headlines, the next shocking expose. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out, there. She had always been a master at slipping into the shadows. Even when it seemed like she had been defeated, she would find a way to reappear, to strike when least expected. The phone call came in the middle of the night. It was a voice I hadn't heard in weeks. "She's gone," Harrison said, voice tight, urgent. I froze. "What do you mean, gone?" "Vanished," he replied. "Just like that. No warning, no sign. It's like she never existed." I felt my blood run cold. "You're saying she disappeared?" "Yeah. But this time it's different. There's no trace of her, no sign of a plan, no indication that she's gone underground. She just vanished." I didn't wait for more information. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't about to let her slip away again, not after everything. I couldn't let her win this final game, not after all the pain, all the destruction she'd caused. The return of the ghost, I spent the next few weeks digging into every corner of her life that I could, retracing her steps, looking for any trace that would lead me back to her. Harrison did what he could, pulling strings, using old contacts. But she was good at hiding, at erasing every trace of herself when she needed to. But even the most careful criminals leave a mark, and I had learned how to read her marks. Then, one day, I received a message. It was cryptic, an image sent through, an encrypted app. It was a photo of a place I knew well, an old, abandoned apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. I hadn't thought about it in years. I hadn't thought about it at all, actually. The place had been torn down a long time ago, except this time, the photo wasn't showing the apartment complex as it was now. It showed it as it used to be. And there, in the corner of the photo, was a single detail, a small, scratched-out symbol painted on the door frame. It was a symbol I remembered, a symbol she had used. I had no choice but to follow the lead. The message, cryptic and silent, had drawn me into her trap once again. This time, I would be ready for whatever she had planned. The final trap, when I arrived at the location, the building was no longer standing, but the space was still there, a forgotten corner of the city. I parked my car a block away and walked, keeping to the shadows. There was something about this place that felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation. I couldn't tell if I was being watched or if the feeling was just a product of everything I had gone through with her. I stepped into the alley behind the demolished building. And there, in the center of the lot, was a small, faded sign. It read, "The end of the beginning." I swallowed hard, a chill creeping down my spine. The phrase had a ring of finality to it, like the closing words of a story that was about to turn its last page. I walked forward, the sound of my footsteps the only noise in the quiet air, and then a voice echoed from behind me. "You really thought you could leave it all behind, didn't you?" I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice was her. I didn't hesitate. I ran, the final revelation. I thought I knew every trick she had. I thought I had learned how to outsmart her. But she had always been a few steps ahead, weaving a game I hadn't even begun to understand. I ran through the alleyways, heart pounding, my breath sharp in the cold night air. My eyes darted to every corner, expecting to see her. But the deeper I went into the labyrinth of abandoned buildings, the more I realized something. It wasn't me she was after anymore. It was everything I had exposed. She had never intended to disappear completely. She had just been waiting for me to come close enough, to make me think she was gone. And now, with the world watching, she was ready to rewrite the story once more. I reached the end of the alley, breathless, my muscles burning. But when I turned the corner, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A figure, standing in the shadows. I knew who it was before she even spoke. Am I the jerk? Part 14, The Reckoning. The figure standing before me, her silhouette sharp against the dim light of the alley, was not the woman I remembered. She was older now, perhaps wiser, but the darkness in her eyes had only grown, more profound. The calculating, manipulative aura that had once made me fall for her, had once made me believe in her, was still there. But now it was raw, unrestrained. "You're not getting away this time," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure how, but I could feel it deep within me. This time, the game was over. She stepped closer, the smirk on her lips never faltering. You really think you can outsmart me again? You've exposed my lies, but you still don't get it, do you? I never wanted the world to believe in me. I wanted them to fear me. And now you've made them remember who I am. Her words hung in, the air thick with venom. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but something in me recoiled. I had been so sure I had finished her once and for all. But there she was, standing in front of me, as dangerous as ever. Fear you? I said with a bitter laugh. You think I'm scared of you? You're just a shadow now, a ghost from the past trying to reassert control. Her expression softened, the smirk fading into something colder, more unsettling. You don't understand, do you? Fear is the tool that keeps the world in line. I am the truth that no one wants to admit. And you've been my puppet all along. I stepped back, the weight of her words settling over me. She wasn't wrong. In many ways, I had been caught in her web once more, still running after her, still trying to play by her rules. But this time, I would rewrite the narrative, the unraveling. You don't control the game anymore, I said, locking eyes with her. You never did. Her laughter was cold, distant. You think this is about control? No. It's about legacy, about what people remember. I've been playing the long game all along, and now I'm going to finish what I started. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something, a small device, nothing more than a sleek black rectangle. I didn't know what it was at first, but my instincts told me it was something dangerous. You're still too naive, she said, her fingers brushing the device's screen. You think you've exposed me? You think I'm done? I've been leaving little pieces of myself everywhere, just waiting for the right moment to come back. You didn't destroy me. You just gave me a new beginning. Before I could react, the alley around us seemed to shift. I felt it in my gut, a sickening lurch, as if something was wrong with the world itself. The shadows seemed to stretch further, the dim lights flickering as the walls around us began to close in, pushing me toward her. My heart raced. Do you feel it? She whispered, her voice low and dangerous. The game is still on, but now, it's not just about me and you anymore. The world is watching, waiting for the next chapter of my story to unfold. And you are the one who will make it happen. I looked around, my senses screaming at me. This wasn't an illusion. This wasn't a trick. She had done something terrible, and now I was stuck in the middle of it. The walls were closing in around us, and I was certain she had manipulated everything to get me here. But I wasn't going to play her game again. The truth revealed, I charged forward, adrenaline coursing through my veins. But before I could reach her, the shadows around me seemed to shift again. I heard a loud noise, something mechanical, and suddenly, the alleyway around us was bathed in a harsh, blinding light. I blinked, momentarily blinded by the flash, but when my vision cleared, I saw it, a screen, large, looming in the darkness, displaying a live broadcast. On it, my face, my name, flashed across the screen, and then the message. The world now watches. The final reveal has begun. What will you do next? My heart dropped into my stomach. She hadn't just been hiding, waiting to return. She had been building something far bigger than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about us anymore. She had orchestrated something far grander. The screen changed. The next image was disturbing, a video feed of me walking through the city, every step I took captured in real time. My heart raced. She had somehow manipulated the entire system, had cameras everywhere watching my every move. The next shot was a close-up of my house, then my office. It felt like she had infiltrated everything I had ever known, pulling all the strings from the shadows. My entire life was laid bare for the world to see. And in that moment, I realized something. The stakes weren't just about exposing her. The stakes were about my survival. I had unwittingly become part of her final act, an unwitting pawn in the last move of a game I could no longer control. The reckoning. "How long did you think you could run?" she said, her voice mocking, echoing in the stillness. Am I the jerk? Part 15. The silent aftermath. The alley was eerily quiet now, the blinding lights dimming into nothingness. My breath was still sharp in my chest, the adrenaline slowly draining out of my veins. I stood alone. She was gone. Vanished into the dark spaces where she had always thrived, slipping through my grasp like sand through my fingers. I knew better than to think it was really over. Not with her. Not with someone like her. But this time, there was no more game to play. I had destroyed her last weapon, the one thing she thought could hold me in her grip. And as I walked away, the weight that had crushed my chest for so long felt a little lighter. The burden of truth, I didn't know how much time had passed. Days, weeks. It didn't matter anymore. My life felt like it was in a state of suspended animation, where nothing had truly changed. Her absence was profound, yes, but the consequences of everything she had done lingered. The world might have moved on, but I was left to deal with the wreckage she had caused. I couldn't escape it. The calls from the media didn't stop. Journalists, lawyers, everyone wanting a piece of my story. Everyone wanting to understand how I could have let it go on for so long. I had been the one who'd forgiven her, after all. I had been the one who chose to stay over and over again. They didn't know about the manipulations, the webs she'd spun, the control she'd maintained over me. But I had no answers for them. How could I explain the things I'd learned, the places I'd gone, the lies I'd swallowed? What could I possibly say? The visit one day. As I sat in my apartment, the phone rang again. The familiar ring echoed in the silence of the room, cutting through my thoughts like a knife. I picked it up, almost mechanically. "Harrison," I said, the word coming out quieter than I intended. "Hey, I've got news." Harrison's voice was tight, filled with an urgency that made my heart skip a beat. "You're not going to believe this." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What is it?" "It's her. She's not gone." He hesitated. "She's still operating, using people you wouldn't believe. It's like she's underground, building a network. She's smart, too smart. And she's been pulling strings from the shadows the whole time. You've made her dangerous again." I ran a hand over my face, the fatigue of it all settling into my bones. "She's a ghost. I saw her disappear." "You didn't see her, man. You saw her trick. She never left." It was all an act. A sick realization began to creep over me. Had she orchestrated this? Had everything from the very beginning been part of her plan? I had thought it was finally over. But maybe I'd been so blinded by my desire to have it end that I had overlooked the possibility of something worse. "Where is she now?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I don't know, but it's bigger than just her now. She's not just playing you anymore, she's making moves. And this time, you're not just the pawn. You're part of a much bigger game." Harrison's voice was grim, like he was walking in the same shadows I had been. "The hunt continues." The news that she was still out there, still playing the game, gnawed at me. I couldn't let it go. No matter what the world thought. No matter how many times I told myself to move on, the truth was undeniable. She was still a threat. I couldn't let her rebuild, couldn't let her slip through again. I had no choice. I dove back into the investigation, tracing her steps wherever they led. Harrison kept working his contacts, pulling strings. But every time we thought we had a lead, it would slip away. She was always 2 steps ahead. always. Hiding in plain sight, but I kept searching. I kept fighting. The truth was, I had no choice anymore. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone she had ever hurt, for every life she had ever touched with her lies. And I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the world was still watching. The moment of truth. One night, weeks after the conversation with Harrison, I got a call. This time it was different. It wasn't a cryptic message. It wasn't a random lead. This was personal. I recognized the number. It was from a burner phone she had used a long time ago, one of the many things I had forgotten to look into. She had planned this carefully. I hesitated for only a moment before answering. I wasn't sure if I was prepared for whatever she had to say. "Hello?" I said, my voice low, cautious. The voice on the other end was almost a whisper, but there was no mistaking the calm confidence that dripped from her words. "I told you, didn't I?" she said, her tone so smooth, so sure. "You thought you were free, didn't you? How did you get this number?" My voice cracked despite myself. "Oh, darling, it's all part of the plan. You were always part of the plan." She laughed softly, almost to herself. "Did you really think that was all I had in mind? That you, of all people, would be the one to stop me? Am I the jerk?" Part 16, Into the Abyss. I couldn't breathe. Not from fear, not from the looming presence of her, but from the weight of the decision that lay ahead of me. For so long I had been playing her game, trying to outwit her, trying to escape her grasp. But now, in that brief moment of clarity, I knew there was no running from this anymore. No more hiding in the shadows. No more turning a blind eye to the mess she had left behind. She had created a world where every move I made was bound by the strings she pulled from the dark. And for a while, I had allowed myself to believe I could simply untangle them. But this was no longer a game of clever tricks and secret whispers. This was a battle for my very soul, and the stakes were higher than they'd ever been before. I wasn't going to be her pawn anymore. Not again. The gathering storm over. The next few days, I pulled in every connection I had. I knew I couldn't do this alone, not after everything. Harrison and I met several times in the back rooms of quiet cafes, exchanged encrypted messages, and dug through every shred of information we could find. The walls she had built were everywhere, but there were cracks. Tiny, barely noticeable fissures where she had let her guard down. It was in those cracks where I found the truth. Her real plan. This wasn't just about me anymore. She was building something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. A web that stretched across the city, across the country, and beyond. She had connections in high places, people who owed her favors, people who would do anything to keep her safe. But the more I learned, the more I realized one thing. She was scared. The cracks I'd found in her plan weren't just mistakes. They were signs of a woman cornered, trying to reassert control over a world she no longer fully understood. She thought I was just another piece in her puzzle, but I was the one who held the key to her downfall. I was the one who knew the game better than anyone. And if I played my cards right, I could make sure she never hurt anyone again. The final confrontation. The night I confronted her, I didn't know if it would be the last time. I didn't know what I was walking into, what she had planned, what kind of traps she had set. But this time I wasn't going in blind. I knew what she wanted. I knew what she craved. It was control. The illusion of it. The belief that she could manipulate everything around her, even the people who loved her. And I knew the only way to break that was to expose her. To take away the one thing she couldn't. Stand, her power over others. I stood outside the abandoned building, the one she had chosen as her new fortress. The shadows wrapped around it, thick and suffocating, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't the same man who had stumbled into her world all those months ago. I was stronger now, wiser. I pushed open the door, the hinges creaking in protest, and stepped into the darkness. The last game inside, it was quieter than I had expected. The walls were bare, save for the monitors that lined the room, screens showing the world outside. My movements, my past, my every flaw laid bare for her to see. And there she was, the mastermind, sitting in a chair, bathed in the cold glow of the screens, her face illuminated by the faintest trace of a smile. "You came," she said softly, almost as if she had expected me. "Did you think I wouldn't?" I replied, my voice steady. "You've played your game for long enough. It ends tonight." She tilted her head slightly, studying me with that same calculating gaze. "Oh, darling, you still don't get it, do you? This game, it was never about me winning. It was about you choosing to fight, to become the thing you feared the most, a man with nothing left to lose." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to snap. "I'm not the monster you made me. I'm not the person you wanted me to become." She smiled at that, a smile that wasn't kind. "You were always more like me than you knew. Look at you. You've come all this way, all this time, and you're still trapped in my web. You'll never escape, you know. Not truly." Her words cut deep, but I pushed them aside. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about the future, about making sure she could never hurt anyone else again. "You're wrong," I said, "because I don't need to escape. I just need to burn your web to the ground." I reached into my coat and pulled out the small device that I'd hidden earlier, a simple signal jammer capable of cutting off her surveillance network, her eyes in the shadows. She didn't know it was coming. She had always thought she controlled everything, always thought she had the last move. But this time, she didn't. As I activated the jammer, the lights flickered, the monitors turned to static, and the walls fell silent. The power she had used to manipulate and control everything vanished. And just like that, her entire empire crumbled. "How?" she whispered, her voice thin with disbelief. "How did you? Am I the jerk?" Part 17. Aftermath and Reflection. The world outside felt different. The air had a crispness to it, the kind you feel when something profound shifts in the fabric of reality. My heart was still racing, my pulse still pounding, but there was a clarity now. A weight that had once been so suffocating was lifted, and for the first time in so long I could finally breathe. I thought about the woman I had left behind in that crumbling building. I could still see her. Her wide eyes, the disbelief, the way her empire fell apart in an instant. There was no triumph in it for me, though. There was no satisfaction in knowing that I had won. Because in the end, I hadn't just defeated her. I had defeated myself, or at least the version of me she had created. The unseen cost as the days passed. I tried to return to normalcy. I tried to live a life where I could leave the past behind, to start fresh, to heal. But the truth was, the scars she left behind didn't just disappear with her. The damage she had done was deep, woven into the very core of who I had been. I spent countless nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The lies, the manipulations, the way she had twisted my reality until I couldn't tell where I ended and where she began. I thought I was over it, but there were still moments when her words haunted me, when the quiet voices of doubt crept into my mind. What if she was right? What if I had become the very thing I despised? I had let her control me for so long that even after I'd taken back my life, I found it hard to trust myself again. Reconnecting with the world, it wasn't until I ran into Maggie, a woman I had met long before all of this started, that I realized how much I had neglected the people around me. Maggie had been a friend, a quiet presence in my life before the chaos took hold. She had seen the slow changes, the way I had withdrawn into myself, and I think, deep down, she had always known something was wrong. I remember the moment we crossed paths. She had been waiting for her coffee, her back to me as I stood in line. When she turned around and saw me, her face lit up, a smile spreading across her face. But there was something in her eyes that told me she wasn't just happy to see me. She was relieved. "Harrison," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "It's good to see you." I smiled weakly, unsure of what else to say. "Yeah, it's been a while." "Too long," she added. "You've been missing. I've been worried." I didn't know how to explain what I had been through. How could I? How could I possibly articulate the things I had learned, the things I had done, to someone who wasn't tangled in the web of lies I had been trapped in? But as we talked, it became clear that I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone anymore. I realized then that there were people who cared about me, people who had always been there, even when I had pulled away, even when I had shut myself off from the world. I hadn't seen it before, but now it was so glaringly obvious. The long road to healing. The next few months were filled with small victories. Maggie and I spent time together, slowly rebuilding a connection that I had neglected for so long. There were long nights of laughter, moments where I could finally feel like myself again. No more shadows, no more games, just me, Maggie, and the freedom to live without the weight of the past constantly pressing down on me. But even with her support, the journey wasn't easy. There were still days when I felt the gnawing uncertainty, the lingering fear that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely free of her influence. I found myself questioning everything about who I was, who I had become. Was I still the person I wanted to be? Or had I been molded by her in ways I would never fully understand? It was a slow process, a process of rediscovery, of finding the parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of her manipulations. But with each passing day, I began to see the outline of the person I had always been. I wasn't perfect. Far from it, but I was mine again. The moment of peace. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the city pulse with life below me, Maggie joined me with 2 cups of coffee. She sat beside me, her presence a quiet comfort, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this world. "You know," she said, breaking the comfortable silence, "you don't have to explain yourself. Not to me. Not to anyone." I turned to look at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "I know," I said, "but I think I'm still trying to figure out who I am after everything that's happened." She smiled, gently nudging my shoulder. "You'll figure it out. You don't need to have all the answers right now. Sometimes it's enough to just keep moving forward, one step at a time." It felt like something inside me shifted. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without the constant pressure of the past, without worrying about what I had done or who I had been. Am I the jerk? Part 18. The Road Ahead. The days drifted by in an almost surreal blur. The world outside seemed to continue at a pace I had once found exhausting, but now I saw it in a different light. Each day felt like a small victory. Each step forward, however insignificant, was a triumph over the chaos that had once ruled my life. I still thought about her sometimes, about the woman who had consumed so much of my past. The woman who had broken me down and built me up into someone I never intended to become. But those thoughts were no longer filled with the suffocating weight of regret. I didn't feel the burning need to understand her anymore. I didn't need to fix everything she had broken. I could only control myself. And that was enough. A new beginning. A month after our conversation on the balcony, Maggie and I decided to take a trip. A small getaway, nothing extravagant. Just time. To disconnect from the world. It was something simple. Something I hadn't realized I had missed. The ability to just be present without fear of what was lurking around the corner. We rented a cabin in the woods, far from the city's noise. It was the kind of place where you could wake up to the sound of birds singing, where the silence wasn't oppressive, but peaceful. That weekend, I spent hours hiking through the woods with Maggie, talking about everything and nothing at all. There was no need to explain my past, no need to dissect the decisions I'd made. It was enough to just be there in the moment, letting the simplicity of nature wash over me. I remember one evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Maggie turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, her voice gentle, "I think you've come a long way." I smiled, though there was a trace of sadness in my eyes. "I'm not sure I'll ever be completely free of it. It's like the past has a way of catching up with you." "But you're not the same person anymore," she said, her words steady and sincere. "And you're not letting it control you. That's the difference." Her words struck me in a way I hadn't expected. For so long I had let her define me. I had let her actions, her lies, her manipulations shape my decisions and my view of the world. But now, with Maggie by my side, I realized that I had the power to define myself. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it, understanding it, and choosing to move forward. The call of the past life, however, has a way of reminding us of the past when we least expect it. One afternoon, while I was at work, I received an unexpected phone call. My stomach dropped as I saw the number on the screen. It was from Harrison. "Harrison," I answered, my voice cautious. "Hey, man." His voice was tense but not frantic. "You're going to want to hear this." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" "It's about her," he said. "I don't know how she did it, but we found something. She's back." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought I had closed that chapter of my life. I thought I had put the pieces of the puzzle together and walked away. But hearing those words, I realized that nothing was truly ever over when it came to her. I thought she was gone. "For good," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I did too," Harrison said, "but she's not done. She's been rebuilding, pulling strings from behind the scenes, and now she's resurfacing. And it looks like she's got something much bigger planned this time." I felt the weight of those words settle over me like a heavy fog. "I need you to help." "Me," Harrison said, his tone serious. "This time, we need to stop her for good. A new war." The world I had thought I had escaped from came rushing back with a vengeance. As much as I wanted to ignore it, as much as I wanted to walk away and leave it all behind, I knew I couldn't. Not now. Not when the stakes were higher than they had ever been. I knew this time would be different. She wasn't just playing with me anymore. She had a plan. And this time, I wasn't going to let her win. I called Maggie after hanging up with Harrison. I needed her. Needed to make sure I wasn't alone in this. When she answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "She's back," I said, the words heavy on my tongue. "She's been rebuilding, and now she's not just targeting me. She's targeting everyone." I could hear the concern in her voice, but she didn't hesitate. "What do we do?" "I need you by my side," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. "We have to stop her. For good." The calm. Before the storm, for the next few weeks, the days became a blur of investigation and strategy. Harrison and I began to track down every lead, every whisper, every sign that she had left behind. It was like chasing shadows, finding traces of her here and there, but never quite catching up to her. She was elusive, always staying one step ahead, but this time, we weren't alone. Maggie, who had stayed by my side through everything, was there to help. Am I the jerk? Part 19. The end of the beginning. The final confrontation was surreal. Standing across from her, this woman who had twisted my life into something unrecognizable, who had played with my soul like a puppet master, felt like a moment I had been preparing for, unknowingly, my entire life. But now, as I looked at her, I wasn't filled with anger or hatred. I didn't even feel relief. What I felt was something else entirely. Clarity. She had always thrived on control. She had built a world around her where everything was her design. But as I stood there, standing firm, unflinching, something inside me told me she had already lost. It wasn't about what happened tonight. It wasn't about whether I won or she did. The fight was already over. The moment I stopped running, the moment I stopped letting her dictate my life. The last gamble. She stood before me, an expression of disbelief lingering on her face, as if she couldn't understand why I wasn't shaking. In fear, why I wasn't begging for mercy. "You're wasting your time," she sneered, her eyes narrowing. "Do you really think you can defeat me? Do you think you've outsmarted me? You have no idea what you're up against." I didn't flinch. I didn't even react. I had heard it all before. The threats, the manipulation, the games. I had been her pawn, her project. But now I was no longer her plaything. I took a step forward, my voice calm and deliberate. "You've already lost. Not because I'm stronger or smarter or more capable. You've lost because you underestimated something you'll never understand. You don't control people the way you think you do. People choose." Her eyes flickered with a flash of panic, but she quickly masked it with a smile that no longer held the same power over me. "You think you've won? You think you're free now? You don't even know what's coming next." The tension in the room thickened, but I stood my ground. "Maybe. But I'm done living in fear of what's coming next. You don't control my life anymore." She laughed, a sound that was more bitter than genuine. "You think you can walk away from this? You think you can just leave and never look back? You're nothing without me." I shook my head slowly, the weight of everything I had endured finally coming to rest in my chest. "You've got it backwards. I was nothing with you, but now I'm finally something, the final choice." The silence between us grew heavy as her eyes locked with mine. In that moment, it wasn't about vengeance, nor was it about a power struggle. It wasn't even about winning or losing. It was about one simple truth. I had freed myself. I stepped back, my hand resting on the door behind me, not as a signal of retreat, but as a deliberate choice. "You were right about one thing," I said, my voice low. "You'll always be a part of me. You shaped me. But you don't get to control me anymore. I'm not your puppet, not now, not ever." For the first time, she looked uncertain. The woman who had always commanded the room, who had always had the last word, stood there, vulnerable. She wasn't the predator anymore. She was the prey. And for the first time, I didn't care. I opened the door. "This ends tonight. I won't be coming back." As I walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had already won. After the storm, the days that followed were a quiet sort of peace, one I hadn't known in years. Harrison and Maggie were by my side, each of us processing the storm we'd weathered in our own way. I found myself slowly rebuilding, but this time, it wasn't just about finding myself again. It was about choosing who I wanted to be in the absence of all the manipulation and lies. There was a strange sort of catharsis in that realization. I wasn't just recovering, I was transforming. I was becoming the person I had always been capable of being, without fear of her shadow hanging over me. I kept in touch with Harrison, keeping him updated on the pieces of her network we were still unraveling. But for now, I had done what I needed to do. I had cut ties with the past and allowed myself to finally breathe without the constant terror of her looming over me. Maggie was still there, of course. She had never wavered. She had believed in me when I couldn't even believe in myself. And though I didn't know exactly what the future held, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone anymore. We were rebuilding, together. Am I the jerk? The by-e? Answer was clear now. No, I wasn't the jerk. I wasn't the villain of my own story, but I wasn't a hero either. I was just a man who had been broken, manipulated, and twisted. But in the end, I had been the one to choose how to rise from the wreckage. I had learned that sometimes the greatest act of courage is to walk away, to let go of the past, and to choose freedom over everything else. I wasn't perfect, but I had learned one simple truth. It wasn't about who had hurt me or how they had hurt me. It was about what I did with that hurt, and I had chosen to become stronger, better, and free. Am I the jerk? Part 20. The Ripple Effect. The weeks that followed felt like a slow, quiet unraveling, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged in my life for so long. Life, in its new simplicity, felt foreign yet comforting, like slipping into a pair of shoes you didn't realize you needed until they fit perfectly. But as peaceful as things were, there was a certain unrest buried beneath the surface, a nagging feeling that no matter how much I had moved on, I couldn't escape the consequences of the past so easily. I thought I was free. I wanted to believe I was free, but sometimes, when you escape the clutches of one monster, you realize that other battles are waiting in the shadows. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them. Unexpected visitors. 1. Chilly evening. Just as the sun dipped behind the horizon, a knock at my door shattered the calm. At first, I thought it might be a delivery, a neighbor, maybe even someone from work. But the moment I opened the door, I was met with a face I hadn't seen in months. Detective Anderson. He was tall, his dark eyes sharp with the kind of intensity that suggested he had lived through things I couldn't imagine. His presence, once a sign of authority and investigation, now seemed out of place. The man who had been a distant figure in my life when I was knee-deep in my own turmoil was suddenly standing in front of me, and this time it wasn't just business. "Harrison," he said, nodding slightly, his voice gruff. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, letting him in. The feeling of unease crept into my chest, and I couldn't quite place why. It wasn't just his appearance. It was the weight of what might be coming next. We sat in silence for a few moments before I broke it. "What's going on?" Anderson's expression softened for a split second. "I don't know how to say this, but there are things I need to explain, things that might complicate what you've already been through." I leaned forward, anxiety tightening around my ribs. "What do you mean?" The twist no one saw coming. Anderson shifted in his seat, his eyes avoiding mine for a moment. "We've been doing some deeper digging. There are things about your ex-wife, things we didn't know before, things that no one else knew." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about?" "She wasn't just manipulating you, Harrison," he said quietly. "She was part of something much bigger, something that spanned years. There's a network, a web of people tied into this, and you're in the middle of it." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "What do you mean?" "She's gone. I left her behind. She has nothing to do with my life anymore." His voice grew firm, darkening, with the weight of his words. "That's what we all thought. But we've been tracking the movement of some of the people she was involved with. These are dangerous people, Harrison. People who don't just let go. She may have disappeared for now, but it's not over. And you need to be prepared for what's coming." I felt a chill crawl up my spine, every hair on the back of my neck standing on end. "What do you want from me? You think I'm still involved with her?" Anderson didn't answer immediately. He looked at me with a sense of urgency, almost pity. "I'm not saying you're involved, but what I am saying is that you're a target. She's made sure of that. Whether you know it or not, you're in this deeper than you think. There's more to this than just her. And there's more at stake than just your past with her." The web expanse I sat there, stunned. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. none of them making sense. This couldn't be happening. I had made my choice. I had walked away from that life. I had severed ties, buried the past. I was free. So why was this still following me? The detective continued, his voice low but steady. You've been part of something bigger than you knew, Harrison, and as much as you think you can escape it, it's not going to let you go that easily. The people who were behind your ex-wife, they've been watching. They've been waiting. I swallowed hard, trying to process the flood of information. So what do I do now? Anderson's eyes met mine, a deep, knowing look that spoke volumes. You've already done the hardest part. You've already chosen not to be part of it anymore. But this isn't over. They won't just walk away, and neither can you. You need to be vigilant, watch your back, trust no one. The past haunts the present. That night, I didn't sleep. The words kept echoing in my mind. I thought I was done. I thought I had outrun the ghost of my past. But in truth, it was never really about running. It was about confronting the pieces of myself I had tried to bury, and now that reckoning had come. I couldn't help but think about everything I had been through, about the woman who had twisted me, controlled me, and manipulated me into something I wasn't. I had chosen to move forward to leave that life behind. Am I the jerk? Part 21, The Breaking Point. The air was thick with tension as I made my way to meet Harrison. Every step I took felt like a small push against the weight of everything I had tried to outrun. The questions loomed in my mind, unanswered, and yet undeniably present. How deep did this go? Who else was involved? And most haunting of all, was it really over? I met Harrison at the old coffee shop we used to frequent. Back when life was simpler, before everything fell apart. We sat in a quiet corner, the hum of the morning crowd around us, but neither of us could escape the gravity of the conversation we were about to have. Harrison's face was drawn, the usual calm in his eyes replaced with something darker, something more worn. "You're sure about this?" he asked again, as though asking a third time would somehow change my mind. "I don't have a choice," I replied, my voice firm despite the gnawing doubt that curled in my stomach. "I can't just walk away. This isn't something I can ignore." His eyes lingered on me for a moment before he nodded slowly. "You're right. You're in this, whether you want to be or not, and I'll help you. But we have to be smart about it. No one can know what we're doing. You're already a target, Harrison. You've been under their radar for too long." I looked out the window, letting his words settle in. My entire life, it seemed, had been one long game of survival. The difference now was that I wasn't playing for survival anymore. I was playing for control, and I wasn't about to lose. The plan unfolds as we delved deeper into our strategy. It became clear just how much I had underestimated everything. Anderson had been right. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't about the woman who had once been my wife. The woman I had loved, betrayed, and who had betrayed me in turn. No, it was bigger than that. The people behind her, the network she had been building, had woven themselves into places I never could have imagined. They were everywhere, and they were coming for me. Harrison and I spent the next several days tracking down leads, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that had been hidden in plain sight. Our focus was sharp, relentless. I kept thinking of Maggie, of how she had stood by me through everything. I couldn't bring myself to tell her everything, not yet. Not until I knew what we were truly up against. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the closer we got to the truth, the more I was pulling everyone I cared about into the crossfire. The unexpected. Ally a week later, I received a phone call from an unexpected source. "Detective Anderson again. Meet me," he said, his voice urgent. "I've got something you need to see. It's important." I didn't hesitate. I knew by now that every call, every piece of information mattered. I arranged to meet him at a nondescript diner on the outskirts of town, a place that didn't draw attention. As I walked through the door, I immediately spotted him at the far corner. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. "What's this about?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Anderson didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've got someone who wants to talk to you, someone who knows more about your ex-wife's network than anyone else, but it's not going to be easy." I raised an eyebrow. "You're not making this sound like a good idea." "You don't have a choice," he said. "You think you've been keeping things under control? You've only seen the tip of the iceberg. This person can help you, but it comes at a price." "A price?" My mind raced. "What price?" Anderson hesitated, then leaned in closer. "This person, they're one of them, a former member of the group. But they've turned. They want to help, but you need to understand. This person is just as dangerous as the ones you're fighting." I felt my chest tighten. "So you want me to trust a traitor?" "I'm telling you, you don't have a choice," he replied sharply. "This could be your only shot to get the information you need before everything spirals out of control." I had no choice but to agree. The price of truth. The following day, I met the person, who had once been a part of her network, now turned informant. Her name was Lila, and she was someone I had never expected to cross paths with. Dark-haired, sharp-eyed, and with a calm demeanor that bordered on eerie, she looked like someone who had seen the darkest corners of the world. "Let's get this over with," she said, her voice flat. "I don't have much time, and neither do you." We went over everything, her history with the group, how she had worked alongside my ex-wife, the connections, the deals, the betrayals. It was a labyrinth of corruption and power that reached far beyond what I had ever thought possible. She spoke in clipped sentences, revealing more than I had ever anticipated. But there were gaps, things she refused to say. She was hiding something. I could feel it.